Here, I'll try. Whoops. Hey, there we go. Good afternoon. I hope you had a great lunch and hope you enjoyed that display downstairs. It's truly remarkable. And again, if you have an opportunity to, is Hope up here? She's probably working. If you have a chance to thank her, please do. She has done a beautiful job with this. It's her vision, her dream, and it's been really special. We do have a person with us today by the name of Diane Burkett. Is that correct? And she is a friend of Satterthwaite. Becky, is she here? I'm sorry. Becky Satterthwaite, I do know you. They're friends, and Becky came to me a while back and said, hey, she's got an organization that helps veterans, and how might we help share this word? And I said, when people come here for this, they'll be interested. So I want to invite Diane to come and share a few words about what she's doing, and it's called Affinity for Vets. There you go. Sure, yeah, absolutely.
I've always wanted to be up on the pulpit. Okay, so a little bit about me. You already know that good friends with Becky, so I want to thank her. So before I start, I want to thank everybody here at Lebanon United Methodist Church for the invitation and everybody's presence. I'm very grateful. Going downstairs earlier, I have to tell you that it made my heart smile. Whatever you're doing down there, it's more than just what you see. I could feel the honor, the love, everything within that room. So I really commend you. It's really beautiful. So, as he mentioned, my name's Diane Burkett. I am the founder of Affinity Project, and we're going to talk about that for a few minutes. And I'm also mother of Specialist Robert Kissel Burkett. And Becky was very well aware of what Bobby was like as a child, because we've known each other for over 30 years. So, why Affinity Project? This is a picture of my son, Bobby. And he was a child that was not really knowing where he wanted to go and what kind of livelihood he wanted. But he knew that the Army National Guard, the Ohio Army National Guard, was a place that he could provide service for others. He definitely had a very compassionate, giving heart. Affinity Project actually began its creation before we even knew it existed, and that was Wednesday morning following the attacks of 9/11. I woke up and Bobby's army bags were packed on the floor in the kitchen. I asked him what was going on. He said he was ready. He knew he would be called, and he knew that God wanted him to be called. He was not. However, 3 to 4 years later, the calling was still very powerful, and he volunteered for deployment. He was a combat engineer in Iraq. Was there from 2004, November, through January of 2006. Had multiple experiences with IED. He was detonating IED explosions or devices and multiple blast injuries. He returned home, and shortly after he returned, we realized that he was still fighting a war with boots on home ground. It took some time, but he was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. As a result of those diagnoses, we asked him to come back home. We learned firsthand what it was like to witness somebody that was really suffering and impacted by those invisible war wounds. He was doing everything he could to get healthy. A little bit about post-traumatic stress is it is a mental health condition where you keep reliving the trauma. You have night terrors, trouble sleeping, trouble eating, amnesia, where you might have hours where you don't know where you're at. Triggers could be as simple as trying to drive to his grandmother's house and having to look for roadside bombs on the way. Traumatic brain injury was something that was new to me, and that you hear more about sports injuries with multiple concussions. And as a result of it, you develop aneurysms in your brain. And as a result of that, it's a physiological condition. And you usually get cardiovascular disease, hypertension, stroke, seizures as a result of those blast injuries. You don't have to be hit by a bomb. It's just the wave of the blast that is shaking your brain and changing it physiologically. So as we were trying to help him with everything we could to get better and get back, we found a program here in the greater Cincinnati area with the VA Medical Center. It's a renowned program. A lot of people don't know about it, so I'm hoping this is awareness for everybody here. They have a 7-week residential program, and it's located in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. And during this 7 weeks, 32 men and women who are impacted by these invisible war wounds come in for treatment, very intensive treatment program. And Bobby was admitted to start that in July of 2011. About a couple months prior, May 15th, 2011, he died suddenly from what appeared to be a result of the brain injury. One of the things that was really important to him when it was time to go to this program is support. Who's going to be there in the evening or the weekends? His sister, just by chance, moved to Fort Thomas, and he's like, I can do this. So years later, actually it was probably about 1.5 years after he passed, and I can share this with everybody here because I know this is a group of faith. I was told that I needed to do something to help these men and women. Now, I actually fought that. I told God, no, thank you. He was very persistent. It was about 2 years later, and then the past 3.5 years, it took me 3.5 years to get the VA open to my proposal. What I found is that these men and women who have invisible injuries are unseen. Nobody knows they're there. They weren't receiving any big duffel bags from P&G or anybody in the community because no one even knew they were there. They were silently there getting treatment away from their family. And they can be from all over the United States, could be from Lebanon. I remembered how important it was for Bobby. And so what I created was a welcome bag. It's in this zipper pouch. And in it is about $50 worth of a bus pass, movie, ice cream, places they could walk to, a map. The high school, you can see some of the stuff up there. The high school donated some passes so they can go to sports events within walking distance. The YMCA provided passes during their stay. So they have things that they can do to help get them out. And most importantly, they know that we know as a community, including everyone here too, that they matter, that we know they're there and we'll never forget. And one of the things that's probably the most important part of the packet is a card, is a thank you card. People will write thank you cards, and when I deliver the packets to the group, they're in groups of 10 for traumatic brain injury, 10 for female post-traumatic stress, and 12 male post-traumatic stress. And when I go deliver them, they randomly pick a packet, and I tell them whatever card is in there is a card that was meant for them. I wish I could take everyone with me because they are so grateful. I can't even begin to tell you how grateful they are. And as I'm leaving, they say, please tell anybody who's behind this, helping you, how much we appreciate it. So far, the first packets I gave was in February of this year. There's 244 men and women that come all year round. And I've delivered 182 packets so far this year. I want to just read something because I think it speaks volumes of the response. The first cohort, I received this on our Affinity Project Facebook page. My husband is in the first cohort to receive one of these bags. He asked me to reach out and thank you very much. It really touched his heart. I just watched the video announcement and cried. He was so grateful. He went through and told me all the cool stuff in the bag and how much it meant to him that all of you took the time to put this together. Thank you so much for your kindness and thoughtfulness. It means so much, not just to the veterans who are there, but to the many of us holding down the fort at home. I appreciate my veteran every day and have so much respect for his strength and bravery. It's just really refreshing to see others stepping up and supporting them. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. The community involvement has been amazing. I've been in awe at people's response, and even to the point where some of the local merchants will even give more because they're so happy to see the veterans come in. The reason for Affinity, my daughter named it Affinity because of we're all connected. There isn't anybody in here that's either not a veteran, has a loved one that's a veteran, or knows a veteran. And being a caregiver or a family member of a veteran or a loved one, you've also deserve our gratitude and our respect and honor for having the bravery to be there. So Affinity is because we're all connected. It's a grassroots group. 100% goes, anything we raise, 100% goes to the veterans. It's all ages. This is my committee team. Have a great committee team. What can anybody do? It can be as simple as just telling people about the program, telling people about Affinity and about the program that the VA has, sending a card, writing a card. I left some cards over or downstairs if anybody would like to write some today. In the packet, it's $50 a piece, sponsoring a veteran. If you want to send a card from your family with $50, your card will go into the packet to kind of sponsor a veteran. Help us with fundraising. Keep us in your prayers. Know that we're there. If there's anything that we can do also to help anybody here in the community, or you know anybody that maybe benefit from the program, get in touch with me and I'll make sure I'll help connect you to the person that's at the VA. This is the nonprofit site, is the Affinity for Veterans.org. It has more information about our mission and our values and how we got started, and that's where I get the 501(c)(3) through. And then we're also on Facebook, and we also have a Gmail account. So before closing, I want to thank everybody here who has served our country, who's a veteran, anybody that is a family member, for being there for our veterans, and for your attention and the honor of giving me this time to speak a little bit about Affinity Project. Anybody have any questions before I close? I hope to be around later, but if not, I'm sure Becky can answer anything. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane, for responding to God's call and making a difference in people's lives.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to invite John Wukovits to come. What a joy to have him last year. And I got to know him initially by reading his book, For Crew and Country. It was given to me by a friend. And it sat there for a couple of years, and I finally picked it up. And it's been one of the most moving books that I have ever read. Out of the blue, I decided to look up where he was from, listened to one of his talks online, and said, boy, wouldn't it be neat? I said to Hope, wouldn't it be neat if we could get him to come and speak? And so it worked out last year. We're glad that you're back, John. I don't know if people know that you're from TSUN, the state up north, correct? So we'll try not to mention the actual name, but we're glad you're here. And he's taught school for, 30 years with junior high students? Is that right? That's right. Anyway, you're going to enjoy hearing him today. Thank you for being here. Do you want this microphone or?
I'll take one. Go ahead. Think that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here.
All set? Okay. Thank you, guys. Well, thank you, Pastor, for inviting me, and Hope for inviting me here. I hope I don't speak too loudly. I taught for 30 years in junior high, and you get used to projecting sometimes, especially the back rows back there, so watch out. I'll be keeping my eye on you. Anyway, let me clip this in here. Hopefully that doesn't take me on the belt. That probably makes sense, doesn't it? There. Thank you. Okay, we are set. Now to get my remote control here, and that'll remove things. But thank you for having me back here again this year to talk to you about the work that I do, especially for Veterans Day here. You have on the screen behind me a picture of the book I'll talk about, Soldiers of a Different Cloth, which is a book about chaplains in World War II. Now, in reference to that state up north, I was born in Akron, Ohio, so I should get some points for that, right? I do not like Michigan that much. A few more points for that. I got my master's at Michigan State. Yeah. I don't know. You guys don't dislike Michigan State as much as that other team, but anyway, I appreciate the chance to talk about some people who, although they're from the University of Notre Dame, this book is not really a Notre Dame book. I set out writing it with the purpose of, okay, the market I'm going to tend or focus on is not a Notre Dame market, it's just a World War II market. So when you read it, it's the story of World War II, both theaters, European and Pacific, told through the experiences of 5 or 6 of these chaplains. Almost as if I say, hey, I'm going to tell the story of World War II through the experiences of 5 citizens from Lebanon, Ohio. So that's how I sort of look at it, even though I certainly enjoy Notre Dame. Let's see, there we go. My education, I just mentioned a little bit of that there in my talk in Sacred Heart Seminary. I was thinking of being a Catholic priest in high school, so I was there for 4 years, and then decided, no, I wanted to have a family, et cetera, et cetera. I come from a Notre Dame family, quite a bit. Those are mostly pictures of my dad, who was a big-time athlete in the 1930s. They won the national championship in basketball in the 1930s, and the arrow's pointing to Dad. He's also baseball. That's my Aunt Teresa, Dad's sister, who passed away a couple years ago at age 103. That's a picture of her at age 100. She loved attending Notre Dame basketball game with a women's team. And when it was her 100th birthday, they made a big celebration at the arena for her. Excuse me. The mom and dad were married on campus, and trying to get to the next one. And then we get to the scarier part of the family. There's me in 1967 in the upper right there. My brother Tom doesn't show up too well, he's right there. And my niece was the student body president at Notre Dame about 10 or 12 years ago. So after I graduated from Notre Dame, and if you were here last year, a little bit of this will be familiar, but if you're like me, maybe you've forgotten it all anyway. That's just how it goes, but I'll repeat it for those who weren't here. I started as a teacher I taught 30 years, 8th grade and 7th grade language arts and history. And you have a picture there of me in my first year, which we had a nice chuckle at last year. And I use that in every presentation, and it never fails to get some chuckles because of the nerdish look of the 1960s. That's 1968, keep in mind. You know, the horn-rimmed glasses, many of us will remember those wide ties. The knots were choking you, kind of a thing almost, long sideburns. I'm convinced that the movie Revenge of the Nerds came out not long after because they saw that picture. Now take a look. See that guy in the middle there? Whoops. I'm convinced that had something to do with it. Anyway, I really loved my teaching. And in the classroom, I was real big on telling the kids, follow your dreams. Don't let anybody tell you you can't be something. Overcome any obstacle. I'd show them Rudy, the movie from Notre Dame. That poster there says, great visions often start with small dreams. Pictures all over the place. And one day I was telling them this, and I thought to myself, you know, John, you have always wanted to write an article, but you never took that first step to do it. And here I am telling these kids to do that. So that's the day I started to look into writing in a serious manner. The first article was right there. It was just about a guy who the local library was named after, but to see my name in print was a big deal. They paid me $20. Mom read it, Dad read it. That's it, probably. It was just in a small weekly newspaper kind of a thing, but boy, was I proud. Well, one thing led to another, and to the books that I've written that are on the screen there. Did some TV work. My next book I wanted to point out because there are two people from Ohio who will play a prominent role in it. It'll be about the first 2 weeks of the battle in the Solomon Islands. Guadalcanal is the most familiar name, maybe. But there are two people there, and when I was driving down, he's from Bellefontaine, Dr. Pratt. I was driving down on I-75, and there was a sign, Bellefontaine, over. There's where Dr. Pratt lived. You know, because I've just started this, and I want to interview them because this guy really did something special. I mean, he didn't have to go into World War II. He was a hero in World War I and a renowned physician in Bellefontaine. But he went over anyway and ended up dying there. A couple weeks later, his son died also. And Lieutenant Getke was born in Canton, Ohio. And so that's the next one I'm going to be working on. Now, some of you have already asked about the book that's being turned into a movie, The Hell from the Heavens. It's pictured there in the upper left corner. I mentioned it last year. Mel Gibson, they're still working on it. He had his budget. He wanted $100 million for this film, and he got it from a group of Chinese financiers, or at least the agreement. Then the trade war hit, and the Chinese government isn't letting money out of the country. So he's waiting for that to clear up. In the meantime, he's looking at other sources, including Mark Wahlberg, who is going to star in the movie, and he's also helping out. But they were just over in Australia a week or so ago looking for scenes and different places to film this movie. So it's going to happen, but it was just delayed a little bit. And we'll see if it compares to Midway, or how Midway does it just now is coming out. Well, that's a picture of me with Gibson. I think I told you that last year in his backyard when I went out there to look over the screenplay. Now, the idea for this book, Soldiers of a Different Cloth, came when I was reading a book about the history of Notre Dame. See, still a nerd. I don't lose that. This history of Notre Dame was written 2 years after the end of World War II, and the author said in there, there were 30-some chaplains from Notre Dame in World War II. Maybe someday someone will write their story, and I'm going, yeah, here I am. Let me have it. Anything, Notre Dame, I'll have to go to campus and research in the archives and all that stuff. And I love any excuse to go to campus, football games and every other thing. And so I said, all right, I'll do this, or at least I'll look into it, but I need 2 items to be answered yes. First of all, did they serve somewhere with action? They couldn't be all on stateside posts, back lines. They had to be on the combat zone. And secondly, did they leave records of it? Every chaplain in the military fills out a monthly chaplain report, but they're very sparse. For the Catholic chaplains, how many masses did they celebrate? How many confessions did they hear? Well, you can't do much with that, Oh my gosh. And obviously I found the answer was yes to both of them. I found in this one here, Father Joseph Barry, who became my favorite, and I'll mention him a little bit more. Father Barry up here, there he is, handing out communion. I can say that every day and night on this battlefront is a constant reminder of death. Each shell came a little closer, and each prayer became a little more fervent. So this guy was somewhere where the action really was. The map that you see here is of Europe. The blue dots represent a chaplain. So you can see they were spread out all over Europe. So they weren't all on stateside posts for sure. Pacific, even more. Look at all those dots. 8 of those dots were in prison camp for most of the war. 1 in Europe, 8 more in the Pacific. So I thought, okay, they have been somewhere. Now, did they leave records? Well, when I went to Notre Dame to check in the archives, I found more than enough, because these chaplains wrote letters back to their superior at Notre Dame. They were not what called diocesan priests in the Catholic faith, are the ones who are out of, let's say, the Diocese of Toledo, Ohio, and they're assigned parishes to serve. Then there are also orders, the Jesuits, Franciscans. These guys belong to an order called Congregation of Holy Cross. They operate Notre Dame. Okay? Well, these guys wrote letters to their superior at Notre Dame, and a lot of them were just cursory, hey, here's what I'm doing, and that's it. But others, especially Father Barry, filled with detail, filled with emotion. And, I got into the archives, and I took out the first folder. And when you're researching in folders in archives, you can tell if people have been through these folders, because they're disheveled, out of place, bent papers. These, perfect. It's like if I blew the dust, it would be 1945 dust coming out, I thought, great, I've got some perfect stuff. So there was more than enough to fill it in. Then what a soldier told me, or what he said about chaplains, was the icebreaker for sure. I take my hat off to these fellows. They go into action unarmed. My God, think of entering battle with a book, the Bible, for a weapon. In combat, a bullet doesn't, whoops, got to stop, that's a chaplain. Turn right, turn left. Bullet goes where bullet goes. These guys are on the battlefield with bombs exploding and mortars and bullets zipping all over, right at their feet. And they're ignoring it to do their jobs, to hear a confession, to bring comfort to whomever. Ignoring all of that stuff. Amazing, isn't it? And Father Hesburgh was the beloved president of Notre Dame for so long. He's pictured up there with Martin Luther King, hand in hand during the civil rights movements. And here he is again. And he came, and I talked to him for a few times before he passed away, obviously. And he said, it's one of Notre Dame's greatest teams, these chaplains. And I thought, well, that's a great comment to use, especially when I'm on campus during a football weekend and I'm in the bookstore. I'm trying to sell these books. So I had a poster made by a former student of mine, one of Notre Dame's greatest teams. And I thought, they're all here for a football game. They'll wonder, wow, what football team is it that Father Hesburgh's talking about? And they'll come over, I've got them. I've reeled them in, and they'll buy a chaplain book, kind of a thing. But I thought, well, Father Hesburgh thinks they're one of the greatest teams, then that says a heck of a lot. Now, they were there from war's first day. If you read any of my books, and some of you have already told me that you have, because I was here last year, I always try and tell my story through the experiences of a small group of people. 35 chaplains, way too many. They're all in the book. There's an appendix with their pictures and where they served and what they did, brief description. In the body of the book itself, I focus on 5 or 6 kind of thing and mention the others peripherally. So I tell them through the experiences of some of the people I'll talk about now. These two were there from the war's first day, the day Pearl Harbor was attacked. Fathers Richard Carberry and Father John Duffy, great name for an Irish, Notre Dame guy. Father John Duffy from the Toledo Diocese. They were already in the Philippines when the war started. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, they also attacked the Philippines. Also in the Philippines was a group of 6 missionaries from Notre Dame, pictured behind me. 2 nuns, 2 brothers, and 2 priests. They were on their way to the missions in India, and had stopped in Manila, the Philippines, and on a scheduled stop, and then the war broke out. So they were trapped there in the Philippines. Well, they had to fight. The first day, Father Duffy grabbed a helmet and ran out onto Clark Field, where a lot of planes and pilots were being killed, and he just did whatever he could for them. To save time, he administered last rites. Those are the words you're giving to someone who's dying. He just gave last rites to everyone. He didn't check their dog tags to see if they're Catholic, Protestant, Jewish. He didn't care. And as that quote says, he said, it won't do any harm to anyone who's not Catholic if I do that. But he said I had to save time. They were pushed back in. Here's Manila. Right here, I know it doesn't come out very well, but it's a peninsula. You know what a peninsula is. All the students in the room know what a peninsula is, maybe. A piece of land surrounded by water on 3 sides was the old definition that we had. They were forced into the Bataan Peninsula, where they had to fight for a couple of months with decreasing supplies, little food, little good water, dysentery, weakening them day by day by day. Well, the chaplains were there. John Hersey was a famous author who wrote a book called Hiroshima about the atom bomb. Brilliant book. Well, he was there as a correspondent, and he wrote in this book, you can see Father Duffy, that Notre Dame chaplain, on a Sunday morning saying Mass in the jungle with some ammunition boxes for an altar and a shelter tent for a cathedral. Or you might find him taking the fingerprints of dead men, putting one set in a sealed container to go into the grave and keeping another for the records. Or you might find him with just one boy, away from the crowd, hearing the lad confess that he had cursed, that he had been afraid, that he had killed men. That's pretty powerful writing about what Father Duffy is doing. Well, they eventually had to surrender to the Japanese, and the men in the Bataan Peninsula who survived went on the death march. And I was talking to a couple earlier. Your brother was on the death march. She was explaining to me, and escaped. A Filipino who fought with the American forces. MacArthur had a combined army of sorts. And they were forced to pretty much walk most of the way from here up to camp, 60 plus miles, all the while being beaten by some of the guards. They were so weak already from a couple of months fighting with no food. They'd just go step by step kind of a thing. That's Father Duffy. One guard, a Japanese guard, a cruel one. There were others that helped them. Not all the guards were cruel by any means, but this one was. They called him the Shadow because he always seemed to be lurking. He took an especial devious interest in Father Duffy. Well, and this one, what's described there is when he came up and bayoneted Father Duffy and left him for dead. He bayoneted him more than one time. He ran his bayonet through and yanked the blade out. Filipinos, after the line went by, Filipino civilians came out and retrieved Father Duffy, nursed him back to health. And then he was recaptured and went into prison camp. Finally, they all had to surrender on May 6th in the Philippines. And now, not just those 2 priests on the death march, but those 6 missionaries who had stopped in Manila, they were in prison camp as well. And one of the nuns, Sister Olivet, said, "We were prisoners of war." I'll come back to them in a minute. Father Barry, in the meantime, was in Europe. I focus on him and Father Sampson to tell the story of Europe. And Father Barry, as I mentioned, became my favorite because of the letters that he wrote. 5 feet 3 inches tall. But I would have loved to have met him. The fire in his eyes must have been amazing. Just for what he did and what he said. I mean, these guys had passed away before I started the book because chaplains were 8 to 10 years older than the soldiers they served. And I wish I could have met this Father Barry. Now, the blue dots will trace his route from North Africa over to Italy, to Sicily into Italy, southern France, and it ended up in a place called Dachau concentration camp, where his was the first unit to liberate that concentration camp. And I'll mention that in a minute. Here's a picture of Father Barry on a troop transport going over to invade Sicily. And he wrote his superior at Notre Dame, Father Steiner, an interesting letter. This morning after breakfast, I went topside. As I strolled about the deck, and there he is on deck, I looked up at the sky. The sea was calm and beautifully blue. Everything was so peaceful. What a contrast to the smoke and noise and blood and broken bodies that must come in the next few days. Surely, war is a dirty game. Now, he never prayed to be saved from harm. Never. Not in any of his letters. Protect me, Lord. He prayed that when the shells and the bullets flew, he'd be there where he's supposed to be, do his duty. Let me be there for them. It meant so much for Father Barry to be there for these young soldiers that in the over 100 letters that he wrote and that I read, never once did I come across where he used the word soldier to refer to them. Never. In this letter, and I know you can't see it, the first arrow, he always referred to them as boys or lads. Father Steiner, my boys are suffering this week. And then he would go on to describe it. Never, if you do that for over 100 letters, that's not a oops coincidence. You do it purposely. He called them boys and lads. He looked at them as boys and lads because he knew, all right, these are not career military here fighting this war. The war started, they joined up to fight in this war. When the war is over, they're going back to be civilians. They were boys. I'm going to do everything I can to keep that civilianness, that boyish, laddish aspect to them, so that when they return home, they'll be as much of a boy as possible. Now, he knew he couldn't change, couldn't totally succeed, because how do you go through war and not be changed? Impossible. But by gosh, he was going to do everything he could. And so he was, Lord, let me be there for my boys, for my lads. Let me take care of them. Take care of them, he did. If you wanted to find Father Barry, don't go to the back area. Go to the combat, the front lines, where the fighting is. He was always there. In this letter, he says, well, if it's 10 o'clock, the night is dark, the Jerrys, that's slang for German, are shelling again. So I'll be saying Mass, and while shot and shell whistle overhead. Imagine that. Saying Mass while The shells are flying. Wish me luck. This soldier here, Private Caudle, told me, he was in the unit that Father Barry took care of. I was able to talk to a few of them. And he said, oh, Barry was what we called with admiration a foxhole chaplain. He was a dandy. You look around and there he was. It didn't make any difference how hot the shells were coming in. There he was, there he was, there he was. And this one, excuse me, artillery barrages, that's a Father Barry quote. When you're crouched against the wall and the earth quakes, pray, boys, pray. Now, I have these cartoons there. Maybe some of you are familiar with Bill Malden. He was the most famous political cartoonist of his time in World War II and after. He won the Pulitzer Prize when President Kennedy was assassinated. He drew a political cartoon of the Lincoln Memorial, and Lincoln had his head in his hands crying because Kennedy had just been killed. He was brilliant. In World War II, he drew a bunch of cartoons. He accompanied the unit that Father Barry was in. He drew cartoons seen through the views, through the eyes of the infantryman, Willie and Joe. And there you have them right there. And so I used some of his cartoons to illustrate. I didn't want you to think I was in any way making light of anything, so I thought I'd better explain who Bill Malden was. There we go. Now, Anzio was a brutal invasion in Italy where the American force had to land on the beaches, and immediately beyond the beaches were hills and slopes, and German guns and tanks, and mortars and rifles and machine guns, and they just rained fire down on the beaches for days, not just for hours, days. Where was Father Barry? Well, this soldier told me shells raining down. No one dared lift his head above the slit trench. Men wounded, screaming in pain, paralyzed by fear, but sliding on his belly through the mud of the trench we had dug came Father Joe, coming to assist the wounded, comfort the terrified boys, to bless the dead. 5 feet, 3 inches tall. He tried to pick a spot for Mass, because they wanted to say Mass, obviously, in the Catholic faith, to receive communion, and Mass was a big deal, like your Sunday services. You wanted to be there, if you could. And they would say it anywhere. Here's Father Barry. The hood of a Jeep was an altar, and all of his soldiers sat on our helmets. He once said Mass under any condition, and one time it was so muddy in Italy that when he turned. Now, in those days, the priest would face this way and the congregation behind him, and the Mass was in Latin, which it is not anymore, but it was said in Latin. And when the priest was going to say that Latin phrase, Dominus vobiscum, which means the Lord be with you, when he turned to say it, he got stuck because the mud was so thick. He could hardly say the Dominus vobiscum to the soldiers behind him. He wouldn't have to worry about that today. But in those days, it was an issue. He said of another time, he was saying a Mass when, vestments and all, I dove into a nearby shell hole because a German plane started strafing them. And he just jumped with everyone else. Now, there's a Bill Malden cartoon of a chaplain pretty much doing that. And I always wondered, is that Father Barry? You know, Bill Malden died quite a long time ago, so there was no proof one or another, so, you know, I couldn't say it was or was not. But I always thought, well, you know, that's got to be Father Barry, the same unit, but who knows? They focused so much on Mass because of what it meant to the soldiers, to the boys, to the lads. Father Barry knew this, and they all did. One soldier said, when I'm attending services, and this, what I'm saying about these Catholic chaplains, I could say about every chaplain of every denomination, you know, these just happen to be Catholic, but there are plenty of great books out there that I read them all by Protestant chaplains, Jewish chaplains, etc. There's some wonderful books on that account. So this holds true for everyone. When I'm at service, I can forget about everything. Imagine I'm home again. See the boy coming out, the lad? Father Barry knew this. it's hell everywhere else. But when I'm here at a service, it's home. I'm a boy again. I'm a lad. That meant so much to these guys. Just for that brief 45 minutes, whatever it is, I'm home. I'm home. And so they took great pains to make sure about that. Now that's a partial list of what chaplains would do. I could have made this triple in length. And you can look at any that you want. Write letters home. I'll come to that in a little bit. They did all kinds of things. They weren't there. They were like a priest and a morale officer, a counselor, a soldier, or got a Dear John letter from his girlfriend saying, I'm breaking it off. He was there for the man. They did all kinds of services. Above all, even above Mass, they wanted to be there for last rites, the moment the person's dying. That was considered paramount to these chaplains. And this soldier said, wow, after all these years, I can still see Father Barry administering last rites to soldiers in the field while shells exploded all around him. He was a dedicated priest, and I will never forget him. As they expired, you're going to be okay. Well, I'll take care of you. Father Duffy back in the Philippines expressed it real well, why they wanted to do this, the last rites. I did what I could, and a look of ineffable peace came to the face of many a tortured soul in that last bitter hour on earth. It was a horrible couple hours, but maybe I can make the last couple minutes something a bit better. There was one particularly riveting scene for me when I came across it. Father Barry was sitting there, and a soldier came up to him, and he sat down to talk, and he said, Father Barry, we are due to attack soon. I know I'm going to die. Would you please contact my parents and tell them I was a good soldier, that I did my duty? And Father Barry wrote in his letter, he said, I knew better than to try and talk him out. You're not going to die. So soldiers aren't going to buy that stuff. I didn't try and talk him out of it. I just listened. And I said, I promise. Yes, I will. Well, the battle unfolded. The soldier was hit and mortally wounded. And Father Barry, in the midst of the battle, he's kneeling down. Imagine you're kneeling down and this guy is dying, and you have these explosions going off. So there's loud noise all over the place. And so he's whispering into his ear as much as he can. And he says, remember how we talked last night? Well, here it is. And I can say you were a good soldier. I mean, it's powerful. I mean, everything's exploding. He said, remember last night? Well, here it is. You were a good soldier. Huh? That's the job Father Barry did. Now, don't think it was all gruesome stuff. As the units neared Rome, Father Barry remarked in a letter, he said, they always kept asking me about the Pope. He said, it's almost like these guys, and I think I have it up here, to hear my kids talk. You see, kids, not soldiers. You would think all I had to do was go up to the front door, knock, and say, is the Pope in? Can the Pope come out and play? That kind of a thing. And he said, I had to explain, I'm not going to get to meet the Pope. I mean, I'm just a priest from Indiana. Well, he did actually end up meeting the Pope. He was one of a few selected to have a private audience with Pope Pius, and he talked briefly. So not all was gruesome. It couldn't have been. Because near the end of his life, that's what Father Barry said. These are the happiest years I spent in the priesthood. Happiest years in the priesthood. Now, I have this section called Love for Notre Dame, not because I love Notre Dame, but because people need something to hang on to when they're in tough circumstances. Family. Most soldiers would use family. That's what they did too. Their family was at Notre Dame. Now they had a mom and a dad, obviously, if they were still alive, or brothers and sisters. But these guys weren't married, so they don't have sons and daughters. Their family is the community, the Holy Cross community at Notre Dame. And that kept them going. The love of Notre Dame was actually love of their family. Father Fitzgerald here, pictured up here, he missed strolling. I don't know if any of you have been to campus at Notre Dame. There's a grotto there that's real beautiful, a religious focus. There's some lakes. I can well imagine what Notre Dame looks like during these spring days. Father Hewitt sent up, he was in the South Pacific. Oh, it didn't turn up on the map, but anyway, New Caledonia is, I think, where's New Caledonia? Anyway, South Pacific, it's right in here. He set up a club, a Notre Dame Club of the South Pacific. Now, I belong to the Detroit Club of Notre Dame. There's probably a Columbus Club of Notre Dame, et cetera, et cetera. And they got together. And I thought you'd especially enjoy this particular frame here, although I should have used those letters instead of the actual word, I suppose. But Father Barry loved that in 43 they stomped on Michigan 35-12, that state up north kind of a thing. Unfortunately, it didn't happen this year again, but that's what got them through. This is one of the things, everyone needs something, and when they were picked number one, that's the kind of news that keeps up my morale, up for Notre Dame. Okay, and this, if you wonder what gets people through, sometimes it's little things like this, or is it big things like this? You know, it depends on how you look at it, I guess. Now, along with Father Barry in Europe, there were other chaplains, and the other one I'll focus on a little bit is Father Sampson, who's pictured right there. He was a paratrooper. He volunteered for the paratroops, and he wrote in one letter, he said, yeah, I volunteered for the paratroops. I thought, great, I'll counsel these guys, I'll say Mass and all, and then I'll get in a plane and go off to war, and I'll stay back at base. And he said, then I learned, they want me to jump too? I didn't know that, but he did. And one of the things that struck me about all these chaplains, they went through the same training as soldiers. They weren't given any, okay, you're a chaplain, I'll take it. Samson dropped a piece of equipment, and the sergeant conducting the drill made him hold it above his head and run around the field saying, I will not drop this. It was called a riser, was what it was. And he had to do that, shouting real loud. They didn't cut him any slack. And some of these guys had some difficulties, but it was very important because the other soldiers that they were going to serve saw, okay, he can take it. He's doing it just like I am. And they'll be more open to talking, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, he got into the paratroopers on June 5th, 1944, the day before D-Day, you know, the famous June 6th, 1944. There you see the paratroopers getting into their plane, the C-47 transport aircraft, and Father Barry would be one of these in there. They were arrayed in 2 rows of 10, staring at each other in cramped quarters. They're quiet, thinking about what's coming up, because the flight from where they were in England to the beaches of Normandy was just a matter of a few minutes. Thinking about things, he led them in prayer. It was hard to believe that we were now only seconds from the enemy, and that within an hour, some of us would be dead. They hoped for a surprise, to surprise the Germans, and they got a surprise, but it was flipped. The Germans knew they were coming. They were ready. Our jump was a surprise, all right. The Germans were waiting for us, and they sent such a barrage of bullets at us. I don't know how any of us lived. Now, he lost his mass kit in a little stream because he parachuted into a stream. And then the wind took him downstream a little until he got out of the harness. And then he went back to look for his mass kit. He said, I can't go without that. And he did find it. Now, later on, I have a picture here of Longest Day, the movie in the 1960s with John Wayne and a million other renowned actors. They have that in that movie, but it's a Protestant chaplain from England. But that also happened to Father Sampson. So unless Father Sampson was lying, but I'm not going to accuse a priest of lying, that's for darn sure. So I'll take him at his word that he also misplaced his kit. Then on June 6th, that day, with the Fast and Furious fighting, if you've seen Saving Private Ryan, you know what that's about, or Band of Brothers. Father Sampson was in a French farmhouse with 14 seriously wounded American soldiers. And he volunteered to stay with them. The fighting was going back and forth. Well, the Germans came in and retook that farm with Father Sampson and the wounded men. A couple German soldiers grabbed Father Sampson, put him up against a wall, and raised their rifles. And Father Sampson's thinking, okay, I'm about to die. I need to say an act of contrition, it's called in the Catholic faith. Oh my God, I'm heartily sorry for having offended my sins, blah, blah, etc. And he said, I'm standing there, and I can't think of the act of contrition. The only prayer I could think of was the grace before meals. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, if you're about to receive from my body. So he said, as they're ready to shoot me, I'm saying the grace before meals. So it's better than nothing, I guess. And I mean, you can't blame the guy for crying out loud. Rifles are pointing at him. Well, a German officer rushed in and stopped it. A German officer who happened to be a Catholic noticed he was a chaplain, and he stopped it and saved Father Sampson's life. So he returned to the farmhouse. And later that day, in another, I thought, interesting scene, sort of like Father Barry on the battlefield with the soldier. Remember what we talked about last night? Well, he was out and he noticed a German soldier lying in a creek a few feet away, dying. And he went over to them and lifted this German soldier in his arms and comforted him as he died, which they were supposed to do. Chaplains, corpsmen, medical corpsmen, you treat everybody. But I was just struck by that image. A Catholic chaplain from Notre Dame wearing an American uniform, giving absolution to a German soldier dying in a French creek. It just first, struck me as a powerful image. Well, then in the week following D-Day, Father Sampson did something else. Father Sampson had a lad, a soldier, come up to him. His name was Frederick or Fritz Nyland. And the soldier, Fritz Nyland, said, Father, my brother, Robert, was killed yesterday on D-Day. Will you go with me to the cemetery and help me locate him? He did, and they were searching around, and Father Sampson says, hey, I have found a Nyland, but the one I found is a Preston Nyland. Fritz, that's my other brother. He was killed too? Preston Nyland had been killed the day after D-Day, northwest of Utah Beach. Then he learned that his oldest brother, Edward, a couple weeks before, had been shot down and was missing in the Pacific Theater. If that story sounds familiar, Saving Private Nyland, Saving Private Ryan. It was one of the stories Steven Spielberg used for that powerful movie. It was based on this. There are articles where, right here, that's from People magazine, the true story of the Nyland brothers who inspired Saving Private Ryan. They even had, and there's a scene in the movie where Private Ryan, played by Matt Damon, says, no, I'm not going to go home. I'm not going to leave my buddies here. And they say, well, Eisenhower says you're leaving. That's just what happened here. No, I'm staying here with my boys. And Father Sampson says, well, bring that up with Eisenhower. You're going home. So they sent him home, the Nylands. That's Father Sampson, where he ended up then. He was captured during the Battle of the Bulge, and that's his German prisoner of war picture with the number and all. He survived the war, obviously, and I'll get to that in a minute. Then back to the Pacific. I just want to point out this, see the picture up there? It's a couple of chaplains, but that's Bing Crosby. They stopped on their way to the Pacific in Hollywood and got their picture taken. Bing Crosby was filming the movie going my way, Father O'Malley. He was playing a priest. And so there's 5 chaplains here, and Bing Crosby. The only one who looks like a priest is the actor. And I just thought that was cool. So I included the picture, in the book. But they had fun meeting him. Another chaplain in Europe, the Pacific, who illustrates one of the toughest things that a chaplain could do other than tending to a dying is writing the moms and dads of the ones who died. And they had to do that for every soldier, sailor, whatever, under their care. Father Burke here was on the battleship Pennsylvania, and when it was hit August 12th of 1945, 3 days before the war ended, was hit by a torpedo, and 20 were killed. So Father Burke had to write letters. Fortunately, he kept copies of the letters that he wrote to families, so they were in the archives. And I was, able to read all those, and I put them in the book in great length just to show how hard it was. But what he did was he sort of started the same way and ended the same way for all of them. And in the middle, he personalized it about your son or your husband or something like that. He would start on the morning of August 14th. I conducted a burial service for all the shipmates. His body was buried, to whomever he was writing, in the grave blessed by me in the cemetery on Guam. Nothing was lacking in honor and respect. I feel, and he'd end it with, I feel that a boy so young must very soon, if not already, be enjoying the eternal happiness of heaven. You have returned to God, your beloved Son, on your country's altar of sacrifice. All the chaplains would write somewhere how hard this was for them. What do you say to a mom or dad or whatever the case? I mean, how do you do that? And this was a good example of how at least he tried to handle it. Now, while as American forces are closing in on the Japanese and gradually winning the war, they're closing in on the Philippines here, the missionaries that I talked about earlier who were trapped were in different prison camps. Whoops, that went back too fast. One more, come on. There we go. They were in different prison camps spread throughout Cabanatuan, the Davao Penal Colony, and the one I'll focus on was Los Baños, near Manila, Los Baños prison camp. Now, you can imagine it's pretty much the same story for any prison camp in the Philippines, in Germany, same thing. In the Philippines, maybe a little worse. These are quotes here. Brother Rex was one of the missionaries. Overused shirts went out of vogue, and the shoes were saved for our release. Standard dress for the men, a pair of shorts, period. Sister Olivet, who must have been a pistol. As you read her diary and her letters, you could tell she probably was being sent to the principal's office in grade school all the time. She was just another one of those. I wish I could have talked to Sister Olivet. And I did talk to the librarian at St. Mary's University, which is right across from Notre Dame. And she knew her. I said, was Sister Olivet a real, heck raiser? I'm in church, heck raiser. And she said, oh yeah, she sure was, But anyway, she said, one claimed it was suicidal for a rat, snake, or snail to venture into our camp, much less a stray dog. They were food. There's our food supply kind of thing. Sister Olivet became so hungry one day, she went into their makeshift chapel and started chewing on the wooden pew, chewing on it to try and get something in her stomach. Their Christmas program of 1944, and that's it right there, that's the first page of their Christmas program. They would perform songs, little skits. Maybe someone would play the piano or not piano, probably not in prison camp, but play some musical instrument. But they'd change the words to the songs. We all know White Christmas, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. If you're reading any of that, not much to do with Christmas, except their version. I'm dreaming of a fudge sundae. That's what they want. That's in a store in Baltimore. I'm dreaming of a ham sandwich with either mango bean I bite, etc. I'm choosing right or what. Food was always on their mind. Food, food, food. And they had this deadly race now. The American forces under MacArthur were drawing closer. Would they get there and save them? Or would they die? Who's going to win the race? What's going to win out? And they had reason to worry because right there's a document that General Douglas MacArthur got that was sent to all Japanese prison commandants. And it said, whether they, the prisoners, are destroyed individually or in groups, or however it's done with mass bombing, poisonous smoke, poisons, drowning, decapitation, or what, dispose of them. Get rid of them. And MacArthur said, I got to do something. So he organized a paratroop raid to rescue these people, to try, get it done quick. And here's a picture of the actual raid. 100 or more paratroops descended into Los Baños, killed all the guards, freed everyone without losing a single person. They were all rescued. Put in these, they're called Amtraks. An Amtrak is an amphibious tractor. It can go on land and water, and it has a tread like a tank tread, kind of a thing. And so they were delivered from the camp. Brother Rex made a humorous comment when he saw the paratroopers. He wondered what was going on. Well, first news we had that our men, Americans, were inside the camp came when we heard some honest to goodness cussing done with real American finish. We felt better. Oh yeah, these must be American soldiers. They're cussing up a storm here. So yeah, do I feel good? Huh? Do I feel good? So those 6 missionaries went back home. This was in February of 1945. The war in the Pacific ended in August of 45. Excuse me. What about the 2 priests, Father Carberry and Father Duffy? The Japanese were also taking a lot of prisoners from the Philippines and transporting them to Japan or China to other prison camps. They wanted to use them as slave labor, and they went on what was called hell ships, transports. But the conditions were so incredibly horrid inside with, pack 1,000 people in here, a couple thousand people. I don't know what the capacity is, but have it crammed from end to end. And then clamp a lid on it, from the hold, and no air is getting in. And you're on an ocean voyage, people getting sick. All kinds, it was just horrible. Well, Father Carberry, who's pictured right here, he couldn't make it. He was weakened from his prison camp experiences, and he succumbed. He died in one of the hell ships. Who was giving him last rites? Father Duffy, the other chaplain from Notre Dame. As he died, he gave him the last rites. Now, the amazing thing about Carberry is he had a chance to escape the year before from his prison camp. 10 soldiers in the camp came up and said, Father, we're going to break out of here. We can't take it anymore. We want you to come with us. You're a Catholic chaplain, and the Filipinos are largely Catholic. It would be good to have you along. And Father Carberry he debated it mentally. He went through an anguish. I want to go. But the camp inmates are my duty. What do I do? What do I do? Well, he decided to stay in camp. Those 10 who did escape made it to friendly civilians who got them in contact with Americans. A submarine took them out. They got back to the United States. They survived. Father Carberry died. My duty is with the people there. Now, the war in Europe ends with Father Barry, a little guy, 5 feet 3 inches tall, in his unit going into Dachau. Now, he knew what was coming up at Dachau. Time magazine called it, its mere name was a whispered word of terror from the earliest days of Nazi control. He didn't want to go in there. He said, I don't want to see this. But he said, if anyone has a duty to see it, it's me. I must see this as much as I do not want to, so that no one can ever tell me it never happened. Sound familiar? The Holocaust deniers. It happened. He had to see it. So he got an inmate of the Dachau to take him around to everything. And we all know what everything would be. And I think it was the most inhuman thing I ever witnessed. Father Barry at that moment had a momentary crisis of faith. He's staring at that, and he's thinking, I've preached love and goodness my entire life. I believe God is good, that man is good. How then does this happen? How can it happen? Am I wrong? Is man bad, evil? Is God evil? And he had a little struggle for a year or two that he eventually worked out, and I'll mention that in a minute. But he was, face to face with evil, incredible evil. And he was a man of good trying to comprehend that particular thing. Now, home, which again is Notre Dame. Brother Rex said the drive down Notre Dame Avenue on the site of the dome, Golden Dome, made us realize that we were really home. If you ever go to Notre Dame, the main avenue, let's say this is the main avenue, it leads directly to the dome, and as soon as you turn onto the avenue, the Golden Dome is staring at you. It's right there at the end. It's a pretty powerful scene. Father Barry, well, I need not tell you that I am most eager to get back. There he is. I believe I have seen my share of blood, death, mud, hunger, and cold. 511 days in combat for this guy pictured here. He was awarded the Silver Star for his actions. The headline in the South Bend Tribune, local priest modestly returns as war hero. He never claimed he was a war hero at all. Others did that for him. Father Dupuis, who was with the Marines in the Pacific, was happy to get back because he said, when relieved of our mission, we returned to Pearl Harbor in 4 ships. When we had left Pearl Harbor, we had 14 ships of Marines. Now there were 4. There was hardly anyone left. Hardly anyone left. Sister Olivet and Cecilius learned a lesson. We saw our country in a new light. We had to lose the security of her strong, protecting arm to appraise her might. We had to experience captivity to know how precious are the 4 freedoms. Father Sampson claimed that from that moment on, after being in prison camp and experiencing everything he did as a paratroop chaplain, other things are not going to quite bother me, like babies crying in church or things like that. So I'm not going to let it bother me anymore, kind of a thing. He went on to make a career of the Army, retired a brigadier general, and then headed Notre Dame's ROTC program for a few years before passing away. Father Duffy from the Toledo Diocese, nothing's going to bother me anymore. Alcatraz holds no terror for the survivors of Bataan and Corregidor. We know God has been very good, though many has been the day in the past when death would have been a merciful end to temporal suffering. Father Duffy, before the war, he was in the Philippines. He used to have dinner with Douglas MacArthur and other top officials. Now, Bishop of Toledo, I want a small parish in Ohio. And there's a picture of it in a little bit to the north of here in New London, Ohio. He became the pastor up there. He had changed. I don't want that. He didn't mind hanging around with the military. He was very big in American Legion, etc. But as far as politicians, presidents, leaders, I had my fill, now I'm different. Father Barry, I fear I'm going to be very impatient, though, when I return and hear complaints about low wages, troubles, sore arms, and stiff necks. After what I saw my boys go through, if someone complains to me about a sore neck, I'm afraid of my reaction kind of a thing. Well, he returned. He was given a post in Akron, Ohio, where I was born, a mile from the school. It would have been my high school if we hadn't been transferred while I was in junior high. It's called Archbishop Hoban High School in Akron, Ohio. And it was there, being like a chaplain to the high school boys, where he recalibrated that crisis of faith that he had at Dachau. Okay, I can see how good these kids are. There's hope for the future, not Dachau. And so that helped him. And he did such a wonderful job. The plaque doesn't come out right. The basketball gymnasium is called the Barry Gymnasium. There's a big plaque, and his memory is quite revered. Most of them now are in a cemetery on campus at Notre Dame, appropriately, I guess, because there's another thing that says God, Country, Notre Dame right there to honor the military kind of a thing. And all of these chaplains, I suppose, they may not have saved any lives like soldiers did with the machine guns and the hand grenades, etc. But they rescued hopes and futures with the weapons of religion. They were there to help these boys emerge boys as much as possible. Now the last little part, lessons, and some of this is similar to last year's, so forgive me, there are others who haven't heard this. Father Powers was stationed in Germany, and after the war, he visited a cemetery, military cemetery, and he wrote in his letter, I found endless rows of white crosses set in perfect diagonals that stretched away endless in the morning sunlight, marking a design for eternity. Their valor is enveloped forever in silence, perhaps all too soon forgotten, except by some obscure gold star mother far away. Are they going to be forgotten? Now, you have proven Father's concerns invalid, right? What you're doing today shows you are not forgetting. But he worried, and that still is a concern to a lot of people. Are they going to be forgotten except by the moms of those who died of Gold Star Mother? A nice speech earlier today. Well, in my work with these books, I've had the pleasure of interviewing hundreds of veterans, and that is a picture of just 6 of them behind me. Amazing people. And when I interview, I always make sure I include one question for all of them, whether they were a Marine, Navy, Army, whatever, Army Air Corps. I always ask them, do you think you're a hero? Stan Bowen, who was on Tarawa, that's a picture of Stan in California these days, and then back in 1943, right after Tarawa. He was a corpsman, taking care of the wounded, and he saw some brutal stuff. And you a hero, Stan? You a hero, Stan? No. He said, that was my job. If a guy's hurt, you got to go get him. And then he added the words that every veteran I've talked to has said, every one of them. And this would be true whether the veteran comes from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, anywhere, you name it. They would all say that. I did what I was supposed to do. And they shrugged like, that's all, I just did what I was supposed to do. No big deal. No big deal. Well, when you think of that, doing what you're supposed to do is a major big deal. What if we all did what we're supposed to do? You know, I have a picture here, you know, the college entrance thing with Hollywood stars, not doing what they're supposed to do. Political cartoon that's very neutral. You know, it's these political days, it's so hectic and so divisive. It's just a person saying, if you walk into a room full of politicians and shout, liar, how do they know who you're talking to? Kind of a thing. So you see, it's very neutral. I didn't take sides anyway with that particular one. I was a teacher for 30 years, and I used this example last year with you. What if every teacher taught just the way he or she was supposed to? That's all. Not going above and beyond even, just supposed to. You know, I taught with some wonderful teachers, amazing teachers, and with some who should never have been in the classroom. What if every administrator administered the way he or she was supposed to? What if every student studied just the way they're supposed to? That's all. And what if every parent parented just the way they're supposed to? It'd be a powerful world indeed. Powerful. Powerful. So what those veterans are saying is actually quite extraordinary. Eleanor Roosevelt visited military in World War II quite often. Her 4 sons were in the service, and they served in some very heavy stuff, you know, a lot of action, combat action. And she had a prayer in her purse, which she said every day. And the prayer went, "Dear Lord, lest I continue my complacent way, help me to remember somewhere out there a man died for me today. As long as there be war, I then must ask and answer, am I worth dying for? Am I worth dying? Did I do what I'm supposed to do? No. It's the same message as the powerful movie Saving Private Ryan. You know, at the end where Private Ryan, Captain Miller, played by Tom Hanks, is dying, and he calls for Private Ryan, played by Tom Hanks, by Matt Damon, excuse me, over. And as Tom Hanks' character, Cap Miller's dying, he sort of looks up at him, and with as much strength as he gets, he whispers, "Earn this. Earn it." In other words, we have just died to save you, Private Ryan. Go home and earn this gift. Earn it. Be a good man. Be a good person. Do what you're supposed to do. So one of my favorite scene comes right after this. The elderly Private Ryan is in the Normandy Cemetery with his whole family in the background, including grandkids, and he's at Captain Miller's grave. And he's looking down. He says, "I tried to be a good man. I tried to do what you told me." And then Private Ryan's wife comes over, and he turns to her and looks at her with such longing in his eyes, and he's, "Tell me I've been a good man." And she goes, yeah, you were a good man. Well, if we all do what we're supposed to do, we'll have good lives. We'll make sure veterans are not forgotten in any way. And this little child in Arlington National Cemetery, which I also used last year, will have a good future. That little child, my grandson, 17 years later, is now at the U.S. Air Force Academy in his first year. So I'm very proud. I'm proud of him anyway, no matter what he had chosen to do. But he is now, that little boy has turned into something quite special. And as you may have remembered from last year, I always let my childhood friends from Akron, Ohio have the last 3 words, always, always, always. And that's all, folks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Going to have questions?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Plenty of time if you have any questions. I have my hearing aid in, but it doesn't guarantee I'll get everything. Real soft voices are tough. My granddaughter, Megan. Real fast speaking is tough. Also my granddaughter, Megan. Fast and soft. You know, it's like, what, huh? But anyway, I'll be happy to answer any. I'll also be downstairs. You saw there's some books there. If you want to purchase any, feel free. I'll be happy to talk to you down there as well. Yes, ma'am.
Would you mind using the microphone?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you.
In all of those letters that you put your hands on and had opportunity to read, were there indications of censoring?
Of which? I'm
The
sorry.
letters that the priests or
Yeah.
chaplains wrote,
Yeah.
were there indications of censoring?
No, none.
No.
Not in the ones I saw. First of all, chaplains were treated a little bit differently sometimes. They could be censored, but they were very careful at not mentioning specifics. You know, like Father Barry couldn't say, "We're going to attack Sicily," that kind of thing. But he kept it very, very general. I did not see any, which doesn't mean there were none, but not in the ones I saw, no. I've seen others from soldiers where even cut out sometimes, but certainly the black mark kind of thing. Thank you. I appreciate it, and I had a blast here last year because I've been in a number of churches. The community feeling here is quite powerful. I suppose a lot of you know that. If you don't recognize it, this is quite a spiritual community, a decent community, and I was more than happy when I contacted Hope to come back here this year. It's just fun to be here. So, even though I'm from that state up north, we're sort of kin.
Whoa.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
I can't see how that was pinned up there. All right, thank you.
Okay, we're going to go do what we're supposed to do.
Do what you're supposed to.
Okay, thank you for being here. Folks, there's lots of dessert downstairs, and there's a lot of things to view. If you can come downstairs, visit with John, pick up a book. Okay.